You don't forget the sound of snow trying to swallow you whole. That muffled hiss, like the world is being erased inch by inch. This happened 6 or 7 years ago, up in northern Minnesota. I was on a solo trip to photograph winter wildlife, mostly owls, but I'd pushed my luck with the weather. The forecast promised the storm would pass north of me, but of course it was wrong. By mid-afternoon, the sky was gone, just a wall of white, and the wind had teeth. I was heading back to the trailhead when I spotted a sign, a little blue metal square on a post. Emergency shelter, 1/4 of a mile. I didn't hesitate. The shelter was barely a shack, a single room with a knee-deep drift blocking the door. Inside was Spartan, a bench, a propane heater, and some emergency rations. But it was warm. I sank onto the bench, rubbing my hands together, feeling the slow pulse of heat from the heater. Outside, the snow hammered the roof with a relentless rhythm. I tried to calm down, telling myself the storm would pass by morning. I pulled out a small notebook and started sketching the owl photos I'd taken earlier, but my eyes kept drifting to the frosted window. By 4 o'clock, something shifted. The wind didn't die, I just noticed it was gone. When I stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was now a pale gold. The sun was already slipping behind the trees. I thought about leaving. My truck was 6 miles away, but fresh snow meant hidden tree wells, and I couldn't risk it, not in fading light, so I stayed. About an hour later, I stepped out for wood, and that's when I saw them. Bare human footprints, clean and crisp. There was no melting or drift. They came from the trees, passed 10 feet from the shelter, circled once and went back. I froze, confused, trying to make sense of it. Who could have been out there? I scanned the tree line, but nothing stirred. Maybe a snowshoer came through before the storm, but the snow had fallen hard all afternoon. These prints had to be minutes old. That night, the storm returned. Walls creaked. The wind moaned in the roof seams. Around midnight, I heard it. Snow crunching outside. A single set of steps, slow, pressing down through the crust. Not circling this time, just stopping right outside the wall. I grabbed my flashlight and moved to the window. Frost covered the glass. When I looked out, there it was, low in the tree line. It didn't move until my light touched it. Then it shifted, tilted its head. The skin looked drawn tight, like ice pressed flat over the shape beneath. It wore no hat, no coat, just a hollow where the mouth should have been, rimmed with frost. The wind came rushing back. Snow blasted across the glass. When it cleared, it was gone. I didn't sleep after that. Every time the wind dipped, I thought I heard it again, that slow rhythm in the snow. By dawn, the clouds were heavy, but the storm hadn't fully returned. I packed up and opened the door. The footprints were there again, heading the same way I needed to go. For a mile, they stayed just ahead of me, neat and sharp in the snow. Then they stopped. There was nothing else for 50 yards, only open snow, no wind and no cover. Then they started again, right beside mine. I sped up, not running, just quicker. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. The snow started again soon after, heavy and blinding. When I reached the ranger station, my legs shook so badly I had to lean on the desk. The ranger said no one else had been out there all week. No rescues, no hunters. The ranger said no one else had been out there all week. There were no rescues and no hunters. I'm still not sure what to make of it. I do go back north sometimes, but I've learned to keep my distance after a storm. Because sometimes when it's quiet enough, you can hear the snow moving, even when no one else is there.
I used to work security for a private development company out in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Most of what we did was patrol half-built lots, keep squatters off company land, and make sure no one walked off with copper wiring. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it paid better than the gas station, and I didn't mind night shifts. I actually preferred them. Less people to talk to. Anyways, this would have been about 5 years back, in late October. We had a couple lots up out the way in Ottawa National Forest, not far from a town called Bergland. If you've never been that far north, imagine a place where your cell signal vanishes 10 minutes after you leave town, and you can drive for an hour without seeing another set of headlights. We're prepping a new site up there, clearing trees, digging test trenches, staking the survey lines. My job was to sit overnight in a trailer with a floodlight, keep the machines from getting vandalized. There had been talk of some local kids throwing beer bottles at equipment, maybe slashing a few tires, nothing crazy. The first couple nights were uneventful, just me and a thermos of coffee, a heater that barely worked, and the sound of the wind moving through the tree line. Then came night 3. It started like a normal. I got there around 6, took over for the day guy, kicked on the lights and checked the locks. By 9 I was reading a paper bag with my boots up on the desk. That's when I heard something knock against the side of the trailer. It wasn't loud, more like a tap tap, then nothing. I figured maybe it was a branch. The wind had been kicking up a little, but when I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, I didn't see anything out of place. I shrugged it off and went back in. An hour later, there was that tap tap again. This time near the back corner. I went out again, walked the full perimeter, light sweeping through brush and machinery. I saw nothing. Everything was still. The only sound was the noise of leaves crunching under my boots, and that feeling you get when there's something watching you, even when you know there's no one there. By midnight, the woods had gone dead silent. The quiet was deafening, no crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of traffic. It was like sound had been sucked out of the world. I turned off the heater just to be sure. That's when I noticed something off about the floodlights. They're trained on the machines for about 30 yards away. A bulldozer, a backhoe near the edge of the lot. And now the shadows behind the dozer looked off. They were longer and moving. I thought maybe an animal had wandered in. Could have been a bear. Happens up there. But whatever this thing was, it didn't move like a bear. It stood straight. It stepped out of the shadows, and I dropped the book and just stared through the window. It was tall. Easily 7 feet, maybe more. Gaunt, but wide at the shoulders. Covered in something black. Fur maybe. I saw a long snout, ears pointed like a coyote. But the way it walked, it wasn't on 4 legs, it moved like a man. Then it turned towards the trailer. I backed up, slow, locked the door out of habit, even though I knew that wouldn't do much. The thing just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it wanted, but I could feel it thinking, like it was weighing something. I didn't breathe. It didn't move. And then it grinned. This wide, toothy grin, not like a dog baring its teeth, but something worse, like it knew I was afraid and it enjoyed it. After maybe 30 seconds, it backed into the dark, disappearing behind the dozer. I didn't sleep. Didn't even sit down. I just kept pacing and checking the windows every once in a while. I'd hear something outside, leaves crunching, branches snapping, but I never saw it again that night. When the sun finally came up, I damn near cried. I told my supervisor what happened, laughed out the weird details, said I thought it might have been a bear walking funny. She gave me a look but didn't press. She said she put someone else on the site for a week. I figured that was it, deal done. But then 2 nights later I get a call from the new guy who took over my shift. Marcus, younger kid, ex-army, not the type to spook easily. He asked me if I'd ever seen anything weird up there. I tried to play dumb, but he went quiet for a second, then said, "Something followed me back to the truck last night. Stayed in the trees, big and fast. I could hear it breathing. I didn't know what to say. He quit the next day. A couple weeks later, the company pulled out of that site completely. Said the permits got held up, but I don't buy it. Too many guys had issues up there. Equipment moved during the night. Claw marks on the trailer door. Weird howls echoing through the hills. I still keep in touch with a few of the crew. We all agreed not to talk about it too much. It's one of those things you'd better off leaving alone. But sometimes, I think about how it looked right at me. That grin. It enjoyed me being scared.
I booked the fishing trip because it was supposed to be the kind of experience people bragged about for years afterward. A couple of days on a charter in southeast Alaska. Deep water. Nothing but glacier-fed swells and snow-capped mountains in the distance. The kind of backdrop they put on postcards. It was me, 2 other tourists, and the guide, a guy named Rick, built like he'd been swinging nets since he could walk. He didn't talk much, just nodded when you asked a question, gave short answers and focused on the gear. I liked that about him. No hard sell on local history or bad jokes. The first morning was overcast, low clouds skimming the peaks. The sea was calmer than I expected, but the air had this kind of dense stillness to it, like sound didn't travel right. We motored out for hours, the shoreline shrinking until it was just a smudge of dark green against the horizon. We'd been fishing halibut most of the morning, pulling up a few keepers, when Rick decided to take us to a deeper spot. I could tell from the way he adjusted the throttle, he knew exactly where he was going, not checking a GPS, not lining up landmarks, just heading there. The other 2 were sitting in a cabin when we stopped. I stayed on deck baiting my line, feeling the sway of the boat. That's when I noticed how the water looked different here. Darker, but not just because it was deeper. It had a strange, almost oily sheen. Not rainbow like fuel, more like the color was thicker. Rick tossed a baited rig into the water and told me to drop mine about 200 feet. I did, counting off the colors on the line as it spun out. When it finally hit bottom, I settled in, bracing the rod against the rail. About 15 minutes passed before I got my first strike. It was heavy, stronger than any fish I'd hooked before. It didn't fight in short bursts like halibut usually do. It pulled in these long, steady drags, like something down there was just walking away with my line. I started reeling, careful not to snap it. The other 2 came out when they saw the bend in my rod, cheering me on. Rick didn't say anything, but I noticed he'd stopped baiting his own line. He was watching the water. The thing surfaced before I was ready for it. At first, I thought it was just a massive fish, too big to haul on deck. But as the head broke through, I realized it wasn't a fish I recognized. The skin was a mottled gray, slick, with patches that looked almost like scars. Its mouth wasn't just a mouth, more like a vertical seam that split open just enough to show a row of rounded, grinding teeth. Its eyes, there were more than 2, 4, 6. It was hard to tell because they weren't arranged right. They dotted its face in uneven patches, all milky and unfocused. But I swear they turned toward me when I leaned over the rail. It didn't thrash when it reached the surface. It just looked at me, or through me. Then it sank again, slow and deliberate, the line peeling back into the water. I let go before it could drag me in. The weight vanished a second later, the hook coming up clean. Rick didn't say a word. He just reeled in his own untouched line, started the engine and headed back without explanation. The other 2 tried asking what it was, but he ignored them. Back at the dock, when the others went inside to get their catch weighed, Rick leaned over to me. "You hooked something you don't talk about," he said, and you don't go back out there again, understood?" I nodded and he turned away like the conversation never happened. I've looked through books, old articles, anything I could find about weird sightings in Alaska's waters. Some of the stories are close, none are exact, but I can still feel the weight of it on the line, like something old and heavy decided, just for a second, to let me know it was still there. I was working the night shift down at the old cannery. One of those dead-end gigs, mostly salvage and cleanup. Nobody wanted to be there after dark, except me and a couple other guys who needed the cash. The place is a skeleton of what it used to be. Rotting planks slick with algae. Rusty machinery smelling like old fish oil mixed with salt and decay. The whole town feels empty. The fishing boats are gone. The folks moved on. Left the docks to the gulls in the wind. That night I was making my rounds, flashlight in hand, checking equipment when I started hearing noises down by the tidewater side. Not footsteps, more like a scrape thump, slow and heavy, like something big dragging itself along the pilings. I stopped and listened. There was this smell, wet dog but mixed with something iron rot I couldn't place. Funny thing is, there's no dogs in town anymore. I kept moving toward the sound, but the closer I got, the more the air felt thick, like right before a storm hits. The gulls stopped calling and even the insects went quiet. I caught movement in a broken window reflection, tall, too angular to be a person. The hairs on my neck stood up. Then came the breathing, heavy and ragged, but not mine. It was close, but not right next to me. I looked down through a gap in the floorboards. There, curled around one of the pilings, was matted fur coated in salt water. Long curled claws gripping wood, worn smooth by the tide. It pulled itself up, just enough for its head to break the floor level. Its snout dripped with water, and its eyes caught the orange glow of the street lamps, deep, wet, and watching. It didn't lunge, didn't growl, just stared like it was waiting. My heart hit my throat. I backed away slowly, but I knew it was moving with me, sliding silently between the shadows, tracking my steps as I made for the dock's exit. I jumped in my truck and slammed the door. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse. A hunched silhouette, still over 6 feet tall, moving like a ghost across the rotted pilings. I quit that job the next day. I won't set foot on those docks after dark again. Later, I heard about a man from town who went missing after a late-night fishing run on the tide flats. Just never came back. I don't know if it was the same thing I saw, but out there, in the quiet salt air, some things don't want to be found. Winter in northern Maine isn't just cold, it's something else entirely. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I was working at a logging camp deep in the woods, a place so far from the nearest road you couldn't hear a car even on a clear day. The men kept to themselves mostly. We hauled logs all day, sat around the fire at night, and tried not to think about the silence outside. On the second night of a heavy snowstorm, something changed. It was just past dusk when I heard it, a howl that didn't sound right. It was too long, too loud, too low to be any kind of animal I've heard before. We tried to brush it off, wolves maybe, or some wind playing tricks. But then one of the men didn't come back from checking his traps. We found his tracks near the edge of the clearing, then nothing. No footprints leading away, just a patch of broken brush. The next morning, giant footprints appeared near the camp. Not bear prints and not moose. They were bigger, clawed, deep in the snow like something heavy had been dragging itself. That night, the wind stopped completely. No snow falling, no trees moving, just silence so thick it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then the noises started, scraping and scratching at the cabin walls, branches snapping outside like something pacing. I looked out the window and saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Not quite human, not quite animal. I didn't move and I didn't breathe. It stayed there for a long moment, then vanished back into the woods. By morning, the snow had started again. The footprints were frozen and half covered. The ranger came through later that day. He said he'd heard the same howls further north. I left that camp a week later. The woods feel different now, colder, quieter. And sometimes, when the wind dies down, I swear I hear those howls again. I didn't expect much from this trip. Just 2 friends, some fishing gear, and 4 days to get away from everything. We found a spot near Redwood Creek, remote, tucked away in Northern California's deep woods. The kind of place where the trees crowd tight, and the sunlight barely touches the ground. The first day was normal. We set up camp, lit a fire, and talked about plans for the next few days. The air smelled fresh, pine and damp earth. It felt peaceful, but that first night, things changed. After dark, we heard footsteps, heavy, slow, moving just outside the firelight. Branches snapped. Low, guttural grunts echoed from the trees. We told ourselves it was a deer or bears, but the sounds didn't quite match. They were different. The second night was worse. The noises came closer. Shadows shifted just beyond the circle of light from our fire. We locked up all our food and double-checked the campsite. Neither of us slept well that night. The third day brought more signs. Near the creek, we found footprints. They were huge, bigger than any bear's tracks I'd ever seen. The mud was soft and the prints sunk deep. We also spotted broken branches and flattened brush, like something large had pushed through. That evening, as the sun was dipping low, we started packing up. We figured we'd leave early the next morning. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. A large figure moving slowly between the trees, too tall to be a man, too upright to be any animal I knew of. It didn't come close, it didn't make a sound, but just seeing it made every hair on my body stand on end. We didn't waste time. We grabbed everything, fishing gear, backpacks, even the cooler, threw it all in the car as fast as we could. I didn't look back. We left the campsite behind and the woods swallowed the road again. I don't tell this story much. Most people don't want to hear it. But sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I remember that figure in the trees, and I'm glad we left when we did. I've always been drawn to that ridge. Maybe it's the way the land stretches out beneath those towering pines, or the silence you find when you get far enough from the roads. The cabin there is old, weathered, rough-hewn but sturdy, built by someone who knew the woods well. That late autumn, after hunting season wrapped up, I decided to spend a few nights alone up there. Just me, the crackle of the fire, and the kind of quiet you don't find anywhere else. The first evening was like any other. I unpacked my gear, rifle, food, and a few essentials and settled in. The sun dipped behind the ridge, bleeding orange and purple through the trees. I watched the shadows grow long and sharp and felt the deep pulse of the forest settle around me. But the woods weren't still. No, they were alive. but something was different this time. The birds were restless. Their calls came fast, sharp and frantic, overlapping like they were trying to say something urgent. I'd never heard anything like it before. Sometimes the chorus would stop abruptly, like they were holding their breath, only to explode again with more intensity. It was as if the forest itself was warning me. That night after the fire had burned low, I heard it, a howl that didn't fit the usual wildlife, low and guttural, distant but close enough to unsettle me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a mix that always pulls me deeper into the woods, but this time it felt heavy. Near the cabin, I saw the first signs, tracks in the soft soil, not the neat round prints of a deer or the wide pads of a bear. These were deep and long, with sharp claw marks sinking into the earth. I'd shown the beam toward the tree line. Movement flickered, just shadows, but enough to make my heart skip. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the clearing, hunched but towering over the trees. Its fur was matted and dark, blending into the night like smoke. The eyes caught the moonlight, a faint, glowing amber locked onto me. It didn't move forward. It just watched, silent and still, like it was studying me. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. The same restless bird calls, almost frantic warnings, heavy footsteps just beyond the cabin's reach. And the figure, always watching from the ridge or slipping between the trees. Each night it felt less like a random encounter and more like it was tracking me, following my movements without ever showing itself fully. One night I stayed up later than usual, staring into the fire, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I heard breathing, slow and ragged, close enough to freeze me in place. I peeked outside and caught a glimpse of that shadow again, larger than any man, with limbs that stretched too long and a face twisted somewhere between human and beast. It didn't growl or attack, just let out a warning growl, a sound that vibrated through the cold night air. I didn't sleep much after that. By the final night, I was exhausted but couldn't bring myself to leave. I wanted to see it again. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. When dawn began breaking, I finally got my chance. That morning, the creature stepped into a patch of weak sunlight. Its fur was soaked with dew, clumped and tangled. The face was long and gaunt, eyes burning with a strange intelligence. Its limbs moved with an unnatural grace, like it was both animal and something else. It looked right at me. For a moment that felt like hours, we just stared. Then it turned and vanished into the forest. I packed up that morning and left the ridge with a knot in my stomach. I still go back sometimes, but I never stay overnight anymore. That thing's still out there, and it's nothing like anything you'd expect. You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.